Welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com, and joining me today is my right-hand man, Andrew Falce, contributor for Still Curtain. Andrew, how's it going today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Glad to have you on. Today is a good day. Steelers training camp practice kicks off today. Players reported yesterday. Nothing too bizarre to report yesterday in terms of grand entrances or anything that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of seen a lot of that die down ever since really AB left town. You haven't really seen the players making those big splashy entrances anymore. And, granted, I think based off how successful the team has been over the past couple of years or in the playoffs, I'm okay with that because they need to come in prepared. They need to come in ready to train and ready to get ready for the season.
Yeah, AB was certainly the common denominator there, I think. It was 5 years ago that AB showed up in a helicopter and then had the audacity to ask the media why they were so obsessed with him. So I'm kind of glad that's over. I think we're back to all business. We got some topics there. We're going to touch on the Jeremy McNichols signing, see who's going to predict who's going to make the roster when it comes to the running back position, as well as touch on some of the hottest topics heading into Steelers training camp, which starts today at 1:55 in the afternoon.
Football is back, baby.
It is back, and I couldn't be more excited. Man, that stretch from like May, June, and then beginning of July, that's brutal. I mean, I love the weather, but that's just a long stretch without football. So couldn't be more excited.
Yeah.
We're back into the swing of things. I do want to touch real quick on Hayward's comments. Now, just a few days ago, Ben Roethlisberger, he had some words that Steelers players didn't take too kindly towards, and basically talking about when he entered the league compared to now, how people were more team oriented then, and they're more of the me type players now. And Hayward kind of took offense to that a little bit, didn't he?
Yeah, he definitely, he came out and publicly said that he took offense to it. I can understand where Ben's coming from. I mean, obviously, you've seen an offseason that saw so much change in the league where players that seemed like they were entrenched players like a Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams, these big names with their teams, went off to find bigger and better deals. In the case of Adams, obviously, it was a little bit more he wanted out. He felt kind of disrespected. With Hill, it was very contract-based. He wanted to be that highest paid receiver. So I get Ben's comments, but on the flip side of things too, you talk about a guy like Cam Hayward, who's always kind of been there and been a mentor ever since kind of he's really taken on that leadership role since he started to, start for the team. I can understand where he kind of gets mad about that. And I think it's kind of rich too, coming from Ben, who continued to play on a relatively high-paying contract, despite the fact that age was regressing him. I think it's funny that he's coming out now talking about how players are too focused on themselves when for the past 4 years, he was doing what was best for him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. The repercussions never seem to be as big when you're not involved anymore either. And so Hayward's another guy who's been there over a decade. And it's in rare company in terms of that way. He came into the league much later than Ben did, obviously. But he's a guy that's been there too. I very much doubt that Ben's comments were directed at Hayward. But Hayward, as that team leader, he's kind of taken on that mantra now, saying, I got to protect these other guys in their reputation as well. He works closely with them. He knows that they're all about business still. And so kudos to him for stepping up to the plate there.
I think you look at the makeup. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I think you're looking at the makeup of the roster too, and it's a really young group. So granted, their contracts, they don't really have the luxury to do what they want to do in some cases. I mean, the offense is almost all rookie contracts, but everyone showed up to camp. Everyone's been working, even some people that were even like last year with TJ Watt, where he had his hold-in, however you want to call that, where he wanted his new contract, but he was at camp doing some minor participation. Compare that to some other teams and all that. I just think, that whole me first attitude, I get it from a player's perspective. They deserve to get paid. You get one shot at this, maybe two shots if you're lucky. I can understand wanting that big contract, but I feel like you've also seen a lot of teams recently too, players kind of going about it more the right way. I think especially with the Steelers, they're a prime example where their players who want to get paid are still participating, still getting their work done, and still expecting eventually to get that contract, to have the team honor that with them.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's such a good thing too right now to have Cam and TJ as these guys that are the next generation of leaders for this team. I mean, you couldn't set a better example in terms of what you would want from them. And TJ just had a comment just yesterday about training camp. He mentioned, I don't want to misquote it, but he mentioned that small cafeteria, small dorms, but man, we're here to play. We got the best jobs in the world, and so basically just saying, I mean, this is what it's all about. We're going to go as hard as we can, and so definitely the leader types that you want there. I want to touch on the Madden ratings just a bit, because now that the Madden ratings are finalized, I know that most people don't care at all, but it still irks us just a little bit to see what Madden does continually. Now, I haven't bought the game in quite some time now. I feel like it hasn't really progressed very well, and maybe that's just my opinion, but what are your thoughts on the newly released Madden ratings? Who got snubbed? What do you think about that?
Well, I think the issue is, and I get it, it's a video game. It's not going to impact the guys playing on the field once the regular season starts. But this game's also supposed to represent the league. And to me, they just take a really lazy approach. And I mean, everyone talks about the TJ Watt, which is obvious. How is he not the highest rated edge rusher? And Fitzpatrick, not a top 10 safety. Even some of the Steelers, like rising sophomores like Naji Harris and Pat Freiermuth, both kind of lower than people expected. But I think, I mean, if you just want the perfect encompassment of how lazy Madden ratings are, you look at the tight end room. Zach Gentry's rated at a 65, which Zach Gentry is not any sort of, a high caliber player, but he played pretty well last year. He did okay, better than most people expected. Jay Sternberger, who didn't play at all last year and has less career catches and yards than Gentry has just last year, is rated at a 66. So, like, they obviously just kind of copy and paste what it was last year. So, like you said, I don't really see them putting in the effort with ratings, and I think it shows, league-wide. And just from the top down, it's just kind of infuriating that this game that's supposed to be representing what the league looks like takes such a lazy approach to it, even though they're making so much money off the game each year.
Yeah, and I think that is the perfect word to describe it, is lazy. Copy paste. That's basically what it seems like year after year now. I don't understand how they come up with the ratings the way that they do. In the case of TJ Watt, 96, it's a great rating. What does the guy have to do to get a 99 rating around here? 3 first-team All-Pros, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. He currently has the best odds to win Defensive MVP this year, tied the sack record. I just don't know what they're doing when it comes to the ratings. Like we said, just lazy. Maybe they'll catch up and get up to speed here soon. But that's just something that's out of our control.
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about the Steelers' latest transaction, which was cutting Trey Edmonds, the Steelers' backup running back, who is primarily a special teams player, wasn't very active, and replacing him with Jeremy McNichols, who was on the Tennessee Titans last year. Mick Nichols is kind of the definition of a journeyman here. Let me give you real quick his history since coming into the league. 2017, 5th round pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was released that year. 49ers picked him up. He was released that year in 2018. The Colts picked him up to the practice squad. He was released from the practice squad. The Broncos picked him up in 2018. The Titans signed him to the roster in 2018. Then he was released. 2019, the Bears picked him up. Then his contract was terminated. He was picked up by Jacksonville's practice squad, signed to the active roster. Then his contract was terminated again. Same ordeal with the Titans. Cut and released by the Titans a grand total of 6 times in 2020 and 2021. Picked up by the Falcons briefly this offseason, cut by them, and now the Steelers have. That's quite a few. That's quite a few organizations to play with when you only entered the league in 2017. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on Jeremy McNichols? Do you think that he's a guy that, first of all, sticks around on this roster? And if so, what is his role going to be behind Naji Harris?
It's probably more of a testament to the running back room than to McNichols himself. But yeah, there's a good chance McNichols is on this roster by week 1. But that's not because he's any sort of a supreme talent or a great backup or, just what the team needed. It's because the rest of the depth chart behind Naji Harris is so pedestrian. cutting Edmonds, fine. He wasn't going to make the roster anyways. Maybe be on special teams and like the practice squad for the majority of the year. Like he's been, fine with me. If you're going to go out and sign someone, though, I would have really rather them sign someone that can legitimately be a number 2 runner because they don't have that right now. To his credit, Benny Snell's he's become a good special teams player, but he's not a guy you want handling a full workload if Harris was to miss any time. And I would say, honestly, the same with McNichols. He seems like he could be a good bit player. He obviously has the receptions and the receiving yards over the past last year and the year before with Tennessee. Seems like he can handle a little bit of workload there, but his running ability doesn't look that great either. Again, it's someone that maybe can come in for 3 or 4 snaps a game if he's on the roster. Take a little bit of pressure off Naji, but if you were to miss any significant time, I don't think McNichols is going to really impact the success that the offense would have because I just don't see him as anything more than, kind of in the same vein as Benny Snell, where okay, he's a fine enough player, but not really someone you want being your number 2.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with your assessment of Mick Nichols there. It's certainly not a signing to get excited about. Doesn't rival like James Daniels, Larry Ogunjobi, not even close to anything like that. In the running game, he was serviceable at best, is I guess how I would describe him. 3.8 yards a carry last year on 41 carries. His efficiency stats would back that up. Where he's a little bit of an asset is in the passing game. Caught 28 of 38 balls, 8.6 yards of reception, which would have tied Juju Smith-Schuster and exceeded Pat Freiermuth last year. So not bad in that department. Only 2 drops. Used as a pass catcher. I went back and broke down some of his film right after the signing. He's got a little bit of wiggle to him. He's a small, compact guy, 5'9". Came into the NFL draft at 214 pounds. Now is listed at 205, and so very, very different type of body and player in general than Naji Harris. Not a guy that's going to pound the rock between the tackles if he does stick around. And a guy that's going to primarily do his work as a receiver. Pro Football Focus had him as a very poor pass protecting grade, and so he probably won't even be used in that capacity. But he did rate out as the 11th highest receiving back last year, which is interesting. So he offers a little bit of versatility in that. I kind of view him like a Jalen Samuels type for the Steelers, maybe a Gio Bernard light, something like that. A guy that is going to be more of a receiver than a runner, but probably won't carve out a significant role, even if he sticks around. And that's something to look at. I mean, the Steelers really need to find something else behind Naji. I agree with you that completely. Looking at the touches right now from last year. Naji Harris, let's just do carries alone. Naji Harris, 307 carries. Next highest running back was Benny Snell with 36. Do you have any idea who was after that? It was actually Ben Roethlisberger with 20. Good. And then Kalen Balazs chipped in 12. Deontay Johnson had 5. Mason Rudolph had 5. Anthony McFarland got 3 touches last year. Grand total of 3 touches. The Steelers don't trust their running backs, nor should they probably, because the results haven't been good. Even on Snell's 36 carries last year, 2.7 yards a carry. And his run success rate was awful. And so there's just no reason to trust anybody else on this roster. So I understand why Steelers made the move that they did. Trey Edmonds was the guy that he was able to dress for them in the past. He's been there a couple of years. Older brother of Terrell Edmonds. I mean, you can't go off of bloodlines alone anymore. That's just not a good enough reason to keep him around. He wasn't doing anything last year. He wasn't getting active. And so average special teamer at best is kind of how I view him. The Steelers are making a move. They're bringing in, who knows? I don't know. I don't like a camp body, but a guy that may or may not stick around. He's certainly not guaranteed to do so. But if he does, I would imagine that he would be able to carve out some sort of role to give Naji, maybe spell him a little bit, particularly on passing downs and try to get involved in that capacity.
Yeah, looking at him overall, I think he's more of a threat to – I think Benny Snell's roster stats pretty secure, even if he's not the designated number 2 back. He's a good special teamer, and that's going to be the role he'll serve regardless. I think that's pretty entrenched. I think we talk about someone like McFarland, and that's where someone like McNichols is going to kind of be battling with him. Not that they're the same style of runner. I think McFarland's obviously a little bit more explosive, a little bit faster, but I think it's going to be that change of pace style is how you're going to kind of view him. The one thing that does concern me, and granted McFarland has the same issue, Mick Nichols does not play a whole lot of special teams. According to PFR, he had only 4% of the special team snaps with Tennessee last year, despite the fact that he was a backup running back. And his best was 26 snaps as a rookie with San Francisco. Just not a guy that has really taken a role there. And normally the Steelers like their backup running backs to be able to contribute there in some sort of way. So,
and you got to imagine that's going to hurt him too, right? And when in the grand scheme of things, I mean, he's going to really have to impress on the offensive side of the ball because he's been in the league 5 years now, and he's going into his 6th season. If he hasn't established himself as a special teamer by now, it's not going to happen. So he really needs to make his mark on offense. And just looking at what we have right now, Naji Harris locked to make the team. Benny Snell, you and I would probably both agree at this point in time, barring another signing or a trade for running back, that he would be the lock too. You can't have a running back room that consists of Naji Harris, Anthony McFarland, and Jeremy McNichols, right? Because McNichols and McFarland, they are both the small scat back type. The Steelers are going to go into the season with at least one big bruiser that can carry the load if Naji were to go down for any length of time. And so go ahead, Andrew, give me your prediction as to who's going to make the final roster for the Steelers at the running back position this year. And let's exclude the fullback position. Let's just the running backs.
Sure. I mean, again, Naji, obvious. He's your bell cow. He's going to be handling the majority of the workload. I think behind him, Snell's going to be there, whether it's as that, number 3 or number 2 is probably more in question. And then I personally hope that they can find a way to sign someone either during camp, after cut downs, even a cheap trade for someone. This offense is going to run through the running game. That's their goal. That's what they're building themselves around. That's why you take Naji Harris last year in the first round. If you don't have someone capable to back him up, to take some pressure off of him, to handle a workload in case there's injury, then you're really going to be banking on your offense performing when you don't have the players necessary, specifically at the quarterback position, to perform. So I think that's just a really unwise decision of them. You look at a guy like Justin Jackson, I think he would be a really viable candidate. And even a guy like David Johnson, obviously more of a veteran, but someone that has had a lot of experience and could probably do pretty well being that number 2 pure backup running back. So hopefully one of them. You do have the undrafted rookies. I'm excited to see them participate in camp a little bit. But as of now, I'd probably give the edge between McNichols and McFarland. Probably McFarland because he knows the system. So I guess he would be my number 3, but I'm really hoping that someone better steps into that role.
Okay, yeah, and Andrew, I'd go with something similar as well. And like we said, just looking at the roster right now, not assuming that no other move happens, which I think it could. I very well think that it could, either when these players from these other teams start getting cut and Steelers can sign one off of waivers, or if they are out there looking for another free agent right now, or perhaps even in a trade. We have seen the Steelers many times in past years trade a future 4th, 5th, 6th round pick to go get a guy they like that they think can help them win football games right now. So I don't think that's out of the question either. But I agree with you. Very interesting to see that they didn't consider someone like Justin Jackson. I think Justin Jackson averaged 5 yards a carry last year, was very good. And then even a player like Devontae Freeman, who's got a lot of tread on the tires, coming off of a pretty quality season with the Ravens, a guy that's got experience. He's in his 30s now, but we saw that doesn't matter to them too much. A few years back, D'Angelo Williams is a guy that came in and gave them good success after a good season despite his old age. And so I'm surprised they didn't go with somebody a little bit more established than a player like McNichols, who really hasn't been much of a runner. He's really only got opportunities over the past 2 seasons in his 5-year career, and hasn't been much of a runner, really only as a receiver. And so if I were to make my prediction right now, who makes the final roster in Steelers running backs, in no way can I see 4 making the team, because who is that 4th guy, and does he play special teams? Now, I do want to throw out there too that Mateo Durant, that's a name to watch this summer. I think that people are going to have a close eye on him. We're talking about the Duke running backs, got decent size, pretty good speed, ran in the 4.4s. That's certainly someone that we'll have our eye on in a position that's really wide open, probably past the first two guys.
Yeah.
And Jaylen Warren's another guy too, more of the compact frame, like Mick Nichols has. Not a terrific athlete, but a guy with some wiggle to him, and we'll see if he can carve out some significant usage here and work his way up the ladder. So those are two guys to consider.
I really like Warren's film because he reminds me of just like a really slow bowling ball, because he's not athletic. He didn't test athletically, but like he just has that Maurice Jones-Drew almost style to him where like he'll, again, more unathletic, obviously, but he's ready to take on contact and try to barrel over people because he's that smaller, stocky frame. And then with Durant, I think he's been one of my favorite undrafted free agents just because of that speed element. He also had some decent receiving plays at Duke. I think he's a guy that, if given the opportunity, could shine. And again, what's a wide open competition for that final roster spot. I think he's someone that can sneak on and serve as that change of pace option. Decent runner that can, make a big play happen, something we haven't seen from this room recently.
Yeah, and normally we don't give undrafted rookies much of a chance to make the final roster in their first season. A lot of times it'll take them going back to the practice squad, pressing their luck next year, and then proving their worth. But in this case, I mean, we can see a scenario where Durant or Warren could possibly make the team as that third running back. I just don't know if the Steelers would want to do it. They're such a win now philosophy type team that I don't know if they would feel comfortable enough counting on a rookie in that capacity, especially if Naji were to go down and that player is now forced into a bigger role. I mean, at that point, they can always go out and sign somebody else. But I really think what's going to save them is they would have to just be complete standout players on special teams this year. That third running back, something that Mick Nichols is not, that could perhaps give him the edge over him and over McFarland as well, who is just so there, can do a little bit of kick return stuff, but not really a core special teams player. And so I think that one of those two guys, in order to make the roster, they would really, really have to look good in that department. And so going back to my prediction, say Naji's going to be the workhorse again this year. Benny Snell makes the team because he's the only other back really that fits that profile of the 215, 220 plus. I can pound you between the tackles if I need to. And you are the handcuff to Naji if he goes down. Not a very good one, but he's one anyway. And so I would give that third spot. I would give that third spot to Jeremy McNichols. I think if I were to just make that prediction right now, McFarland has just been so unimpressive, and it's been really disappointing to me because he was a guy that I actually really liked the pick as a 4th round selection. A guy that averaged like 6 yards a carry in college, had a massive game against Ohio State, has legit 4.4 speed. He just doesn't seem to get it. I don't know if he's just missing the holes. He's not getting the playbook. Don't know what it is. He just doesn't seem to get it. And maybe be reunited with Matt Canada now, and Canada running the full brunt of his offense here. Maybe he can find a way to get something out of him. But the Steelers are going to have to find that out soon. I mean, they got 4 weeks essentially to find out if McFarland is that guy that they thought they were drafting in the 4th round, or if he's just another run-of-the-mill day 3 running back that you can cut and not think twice about it. They did invest draft capital into him. And so it's always that balance, because I know that the Steelers, they're not always quick to part with guys they've made investments in, right? And Benny Snell is one of them. And again, another 4th round pick. So we'll see if they feel the same way about McFarland and they still think that they have something in him, or if they don't. We'll certainly know it by this year. I mean, he's got to show something, and if he doesn't, that's why I'm saying McNichols. He's got more experience. He's proven in the receiving game. McFarland is not proven in any aspect of the game, and so I would make that prediction. But I would also want to throw out there too, if I'm making predictions, I think the Steelers are not done yet at the running back position. Andrew, what do you think about that?
I hope they find a way to bring in someone else. To be fair to McFarland, I think last training camp he did actually have a little bit of hype going around him. You saw some packages with actually both him and Naji on the field together.
He did, yeah.
Then that injury happened. He was delayed for a good part of the early season, and then just by the time he got back, I think he was just really behind on where he needed to be. So I'm hoping he can recapture some of that. but I'm not really expecting it. And then in terms of, like I said, I'm hoping, there's a couple positions the Steelers could realistically add to. Running back should be one of the chief ones. Again, this is going to be what moves the offense. They got some inexperiences at quarterback, inexperienced and new faces at receiver too. So the passing game is probably going to come off pretty slow, I'd guess, early on. I can't imagine that this is going to be a well-oiled unit right out of the gate. They're going to be hoping that, their investment in Harris is going to get them wins like it should. And if you were to go down, you want to have someone that's capable. I'm personally hoping that cut downs, they can find someone. Trading draft capital, not the end of the world if it's a late day 3 pick, but, you're also, getting rid of draft capital to find a backup running back. And, I don't know if the value is always going to be there. It depends on who they could get. But yeah, I'm hoping they find a way to add another capable body. Harris even came out and said that, he doesn't run as well when he's tired, which, big shocker. So, try to find someone that can take some of that wear and tear off of him so he can focus on being the best that he is when he's still seeing 85% of the snaps.
Yeah, and there's certainly an argument to be made about whether or not it's worth investing draft capital to trade for a running back who might only carve out 45 to 60 touches on the entire season. And so I'm not a huge proponent of that, but I think the Steelers absolutely could be, because we've seen them do very similar things in the past. They're very willing to part with that day 3 pick if it thinks that it'll help improve their chances of winning football games in the immediate future. And so
at least
that's something that
Kevin Colbert was. We don't know so much.
Kevin Colbert was. Yeah.
So
and Omar Khan's been the understudy for Colbert for so long that I wonder how many things they see eye to eye on. It'd be really interesting. That's part of the other reason that's going to make moving forward with Steelers football so interesting too, is to see what other theology Khan has compared to Colbert and how they differ in that way. So perhaps
we've already seen some differences from him. The Larry Ogunjobi contract, that structured like something we haven't really seen given out to a free agent. Even Minka getting his deal done as early as he's gotten it done, it's pretty unusual for Steelers extensions. So, it's not going to be anything sweeping. It's not going to be, a whole new regime, and it's going to completely uplift how the Steelers do things. But, maybe he's going to be a little bit more conservative with his day 3 picks, because especially at the end of his tenure, Colbert seemed like he would throw those at pretty much anything that would move. This past season, he traded pretty much all of them away before we were even, ready for the draft. So we'll see. I'm hoping.
And that's what I'm hoping as well, Andrew. I really do want the Steelers to be a little bit more forward thinking instead of just here and now, because they do end up eating some of those repercussions sometimes. And I think it's important to know when your window is and to try to capitalize on that.
For sure.
And I don't necessarily think that these last few years with an aging, declining Ben Roethlisberger, we should have been making those type of moves, although I know there's others that would disagree with me on that.
Sure.
All right.
For all the ones, never mind.
It's all right. Go ahead. So Andrew and I both agree 3 running backs make the roster for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. Can't really see a 4th making it right now. We also think that it's certainly possible to get the Steelers make another move. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate your support. All right, Andrew, let's shift gears here. We're going to talk about some of the hottest topics entering Steelers training camp this year. And first off, right off the bat, I want to talk about Deontay Johnson and his potential contract extension. We are still in those talks. And so it was not surprising today to see the media ask him that question. Johnson has not gotten his deal. Very different than Minka, who Khan basically gave him his deal right away after becoming general manager. Do you think that Johnson gets a deal done at this point in time, or do you think that the Steelers ultimately let him play out the season and go from there?
It's a tough one. I've gone really back and forth at the beginning of the offseason when Deontay Johnson was reportedly wanting $15 million a year. I was like, give that man a contract, sign him on for 10 years at that rate, because that's a discount. And then those talks quickly faded away as we saw the receiver market blow up. $20 million a season stiff. And at this point now, he's probably going to be asking and expecting more than that. On the open market, he'll get more than that. I want to lay this out first. Anyone that calls Deontay Johnson a diva is 100% in the wrong because, he's been a part of the mandatory camps. He's at training camp. He's expressed that he wants a new deal, but he's still, running through the motions. Again, you go back to that me first mentality talking about with Ben. Right now, Deontay Johnson is doing everything that he can to be with the team, even though he's not getting what he wants. I think ultimately the reason you saw two receivers get picked, specifically George Pickens, who I think term is probably going to be suited for that X role. I think Deontay Johnson's not going to get an extension this season. Just the money's going to be too high for him. I think he's going to go into the season playing under the last year of his rookie deal. And then if he really forces the franchise tag, you can see him back next year. If not, I think he's going to end up walking.
Yeah, and I can see that definitely as a possibility. It's going to be hard because if the Steelers do find a way to make it work out, they got to make it work out financially as well, which I think that they can do, but it might come at the expense of a TJ Watt restructure. And I'm not sure if Omar Khan is willing to go that route. And I'd just be curious to see what they think of Johnson in general. Do they think he's that legit number one receiver, or do you think there's a guy that, we can draft and replace him every few years, and we're confident that we'll be able to build a successful offense without him? I mean, Marcus and I talked about this a few weeks back. I think it's important. I think Johnson is obviously he's vital to the success of the offense, what little success they've had over the last few years, and I don't put a lot of blame on him, despite his drop issues. Drops are pretty small in the grand scheme of things when you consider quarterback play, offensive line play, so many other factors. He's a guy that can routinely get open, and that's hard to come by in the NFL. And so I think for the benefit of Kenny Pickett moving forward, I think Johnson's a guy that you want to get a deal done with. He's your go-to receiver. He's the one guy in the team at the moment that you can trust to get open on any given play. And so I'd like to see them get something done. And when it comes to his contract, what fans need to understand as well is this is just the way that it works. And like you said, Johnson's not being a diva. It's just the way that the agents run the show. It's not the players calling the shots. The agents are the one telling Johnson what to do and what not to do, what to take and what not to take. Like, we know how much TJ Watt loves football. And as much as he loves football, and he eventually went into the facility and said, give me the contract, I'm signing it and I'm playing. Yeah. But he missed the entire training camp in preseason prior to that point for a guy who unquestionably loves football as much as anybody else in the game. It's just a agent-controlled part of the business. And so the agents know what Johnson's worth. We saw Terry McLaurin get that contract. In his extension, so many similarities between the two guys, both third-round picks from the 2019 class, both with remarkably similar production through their first three seasons. Both didn't have the greatest quarterback play to work with either. And so they've got talking points. And so Johnson's agent is going to use McLaurin's contract as his way to negotiate, essentially, and say, hey, look, this guy got $23.6 million or whatever it was per season in new yearly money. That's what we're looking at for Johnson. And so the Steelers don't get to determine that, unfortunately. The money, we already have a great idea of what that's going to look like. It just comes down to, are the Steelers willing to pay that, or is he going to get that money somewhere else?
I think even another guy you could mention too, and granted, when healthy, he's probably a step above Johnson, but A.J. Brown got paid by the Eagles. And granted, his health hasn't been always there, but he got $25 million a season. Last year, he only had just under 900 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. And then his best year, he only had 1,075 receiving yards. Again, when he's been healthy and when he's been on the field, I would argue that he's better than Deontay. But again, this is a game of, being healthy. That's part of the deal. If you can't stay on the field, then your pay is going to be impacted by that. I mean, I think you're starting if you're Deontay Johnson anywhere between 23 to 25 million a season. And I just think that the Steelers aren't going to be willing to dole that out. I do get, and I support the argument of wanting to keep him around. So Kenny Pickett has that stable receiver to throw to. I just don't know if the team sees it like that.
Yeah, you're right. That's where the agent is going to start right there. There's no reason for him to start any lower. Now, perhaps they come down a little bit on that number and they settle at $20 to $22 million, which I believe Spot Rack's latest projection was 22 per season for Deontay Johnson, which is still a lot of money. But unfortunately, you can't argue. It doesn't work that way. You can't argue that I think that A.J. Brown and Terry McLaurin are better players, so let's pay Johnson less. It's just they're ultimately going to go by the raw numbers, as much as flawed as it can be sometimes. They're going to go by the raw numbers, and that's how they're going to decide how much a player gets on his next deal. And so it's just the way that works. The agents have those connections with the teams, and there's really just not much wiggle room around it. And so it'll be really interesting. Like I said, really interesting to see how that one plays out. And that's why, I mean, it'd be so important to keep an eye on these other receivers this year. Yeah. So let's shift gears here for a second. We'll come back to the wide receivers here in just a minute. But let's talk about what could potentially be, and probably will be, the biggest storyline throughout August in training camp, and that is the quarterback battle. What do you make of the quarterback battle? Do you think that Kenny Pickett is a guy who could play well enough as a 24-year-old rookie, 5 years college experience, coming off of a great college season? He won the ACC championship for Pitt. Can he do enough to beat out an established player and former first-round pick like Mitch Trubisky from day one, or is that time going to come later for Kenny Pickett?
I mean, obviously you want to see what he looks like in camp first. You don't want to sit there and say he has to start or he has to sit. You know, if Kenny Pickett comes out and 2 weeks from now, he's just been on top of it, he goes into the preseason on fire, he just consistently exceeds expectations, by all means, give him the keys and let him run with it. But you don't want to force that on him either. You know, if he's looking like a rookie, he's having his struggles, you know, you signed Mitch Trubisky for a reason. You know, let him roll with it. Alting as a pro-ready rookie prospect, and one who I think you sacrificed ceiling for in order to get that pro readiness, I'm hoping he sees the field sooner than later. I fully expect Mitch Trubisky to be the week one starter. But if, you know, assuming he plays like at least I'm expecting, which is probably going to be average to slightly below average, like he has pretty much his entire career, I think you can see Pickett get those keys earlier. Granted, he had a solid enough camp to warrant it. You know, the Steelers aren't going to force him on the field. They're usually pretty patient with their rookies. I mean, they'll let them see the field when they're ready. Like last year, Harris and Freiermuth were ready to see the field. That's why they saw the field. But you've had years before where they let their guys sit a little bit, you know, learn the ropes, and that's worked for them. And I don't see why they would stray away from that just for Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, super interesting to see what happens. I know we're jumping the gun here. Obviously, we want to see these guys in practice. We want to see them all throughout. But what we want to see happen and what might actually happen could be two very different things. And sure. I'm in your camp there, where we have a 24-year-old rookie. We have a guy that's played 5 years in college. He's not getting any younger. And I know that good quarterbacks can last a long time in the NFL, but this is the future for the Steelers. Mitch Trubisky is not the future. I mean, he'd have to do something remarkable this year to be the future for the Steelers. So why delay the inevitable? I want to take advantage of a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal where the money is extremely cheap compared to what franchise quarterbacks are going for today. And so I want to capitalize on that window, just like the Ravens were able to a little bit with Lamar Jackson and some winning seasons. I know that the Ravens haven't gone far in the playoffs, but Lamar is 37-12, and they've certainly had opportunities. And so I want to be able to utilize that, save that money, get Pickett that experience now, help him learn, grow, and develop. And so that by a year or two, he's a guy that can really compete with these other quarterbacks in the AFC and hopefully take us far. Now, that's the hope. What I think is going to happen is Trubisky's going to open the season as a starter because the Steelers are going to trust the veteran presence there, even if it looks comparable throughout preseason, or even if perhaps if Pickett looks a little bit better. They might still go with Trubisky anyway, as to not throw Pickett into the fire and force him to play on the Bengals on the road in week 1 and the Patriots and the Browns. And so the Steelers have a pretty brutal start to their schedule. Once you do go with Kenny Pickett, I don't think you can go back the other way, because then it tears down his confidence. And so you need to make sure that you're confident when you put him in here that is the right time. This is our guy moving forward. And the 49ers just made that announcement today, I believe, with going from Jimmy Garoppolo and saying that Trey Lance is our guy moving forward. Now that they made that, they're going to stick with that. If they go back to it, it would be detrimental. And so I think that's one thing that we can certainly take away from this, even before we even see any of these players play a snap in training camp. We can know that the Steelers aren't going to go to Pickett until he's ready to play, right?
Yeah, and I think people as a whole, from what I've seen and what I've read, people are overestimating what Mitchell Trubisky brings to this offense. And I like the signing. I thought for the money it was a good deal. I think he can hold the fort, but people are talking like he's going to be here for the next 2 years on his contract, and then maybe even longer than that because he's going to just revitalize his career. It happens, but it rarely happens. Normally, by now, you pretty much know what you have in a player. I think Trubisky is going to probably spend the next couple of years as that fringe starter, someone that can come in and, play a couple games, but you should be grooming someone behind him. And with that, like I said, that's why I hope Pickett can take on that role. That's why initially I thought they were going to take a quarterback with a little bit more upside that needed the year to develop. But they obviously went with Pickett. While I may have not made the same decision, I'm going to support it as a fan. So I want to see Pickett succeed. And again, he should, as a pro-ready player, be ready to take the field sooner than later. And I think the worst thing that you can go into is going into next season, having had to play Trubisky the entire year, and you know nothing about Pickett, because then you're going to be kind of right where you are right now. Pickett should see the field at some point.
Yeah, I agree that situation is just totally less than ideal in my mind. Like if you have to redshirt Pickett this year and he goes into the 2023 season as a projected starter at age 25 being age 25 without taking an NFL snap, I don't love that scenario. And like I said, good quarterbacks and lasted a long time. Tony Romo really didn't get his start until I think he was 26 years old. But those are kind of exceptions, right? It's not the norm. We saw Trevor Lawrence play as a 21-year-old last year. And so that's quite the age gap different in the longevity that you can potentially have in your career, depending on health and other circumstances. But yeah, I think we really want to see Pickett on the field sooner rather than later. We just hope that he's ready for it. I think the biggest thing that he's going to have to adjust for, I know he's got all the experience in the world in college, but the biggest difference going from Pitt to the Steelers is going to be that offensive line play, where he was one of the most well-protected quarterbacks in the nation. His time to throw, I think, was the longest out of all qualifying quarterbacks in NCAA last year. And he is just simply not going to be able to afford to hold the ball as long as he did for the Steelers. We saw that ball come out quick with Roethlisberger, and it kind of had to because the protection was just not there. So that is one area I really wish Steelers would invest more into their offensive line, specifically their offensive tackles. That's a whole nother debate. But I think that that's really where Pickett is going to have to show that he can operate under that pressure. He's not just going to have 4 or 5 seconds to sit back there, find someone open, scramble outside the pocket. Yeah. He's going to have to make those decisions much faster. So when it comes to the So when it comes to the Steelers quarterback situation here, there are some that are arguing, not me, but there are some that are arguing that Mason Rudolph still has a chance to show this team his worth and still has a chance to become a starter for the Steelers this season. Are you buying into that at all, Andrew?
I would be buying into that if they hadn't signed a quarterback and drafted one as much as they did. They drafted 2 actually to really put that into comparison.
Yeah, that ought to show you their confidence in him right there.
I do think Rudolph's going to be treated as that number 2/number 1 with Trubisky early on, just because again you're going to make the rookie, earn his stripes. But I could even see him having a couple of decent practices because he's the only experienced quarterback in the group right now that's been on the Steelers, I should say. So I could see him having a couple good practices and looking okay, but I just don't see him starting. The team doesn't have that confidence in him, and I'm sure he will still say that he has that chance. And if you ask the coaching staff, anyone can earn a starting job. But then if that was the plan, I don't think Trubisky would be on the roster right now because they would have just rolled with whatever they got in the draft. And instead, they still added the quarterback in the first. I think that kind of tells you where Mason Rudolph's sitting with the team right now.
Yeah, they like it to tell us that the competition is completely wide open and that everyone's involved. Mason Rudolph is not starting for the Steelers this year, and nor should he, I don't think, from what we've seen. Very pedestrian play. I know all of it wasn't his fault. He was shorthanded at times, but there's just not a lot in his skill set to love. Not overly mobile, doesn't have a great arm. His accuracy wavers. His decision-making is questionable. I just think that the ship has sailed on that. What I think the biggest question when it comes to Rudolph is, will he be the quarterback 2 by the end of training camp and heading into the regular season? Because I think that is certainly viable. I think that he could open the season as perhaps the more trusted backup quarterback, probably behind Mitch Trubisky. So, what are your thoughts, and what do you think of his chances of opening the season as the team's primary backup quarterback?
Again, the Steelers make their rookies earn their stripes, and that's not going to be different for Pickett. So I could easily see Rudolph as that veteran, assuming he can, kind of start off camp with a hot streak, looking good, looking like a veteran of the team should. I could see him taking over that number 2 spot and having it early on in the season. My ideal scenario is, either Trubisky or Pickett, either one, preferably long-term Pickett, gets that starting nod. The other one's the backup, and then, Oladukin shows enough to warrant being that third, and you can ship off Rudolph for some day 3 pick, or, if there's a running back, maybe you want to ship him off for and just do a player-for-player swap. Because, again, I don't think Rudolph's a bad backup, but at this point now, the Steelers don't need to have a capable backup. They need to find their next starter, their next impact player. It's not going to be him, so it's time to move on. You drafted 2 quarterbacks for a reason. I get Oladokin's not any sort of a slam dunk to be anything, but you invested in him. You invested your top pick in a quarterback, and you have a relatively high priced, at least for the Steelers, high priced free agent in Trubisky under contract. Try to roll with those 3 guys unless Pickett really looks like he needs to take that time on the bench.
Yeah, and I would do you one further too, Andrew. I would say that the Steelers should only have 2 quarterbacks on their roster this year. I think they need to get with the times. I honestly do. In a situation like this, take the Dallas Cowboys, for example. They had 1 backup quarterback on the roster behind Dak Prescott. If Dak goes down and you got to bring that guy up, your season's going to be in trouble no matter how you look at it. Whether you have to bring a guy up from the practice squad, sign one in free agency to be the backup to the backup, you're in trouble either way.
Yep.
And so, and if that third quarterback has to see the field, like we saw in 2019, where Devlin Hodges had to step in, your season's probably going to be done. And so, not always, but it's not a good scenario no matter how you slice it. I would prefer to take that third quarterback spot and use that at a different position, say the defensive line, instead of cutting a player like Carlos Davis or potentially even like Montravius Adams. Keep the players where the depth is. Keep the strengths of your roster a strength. Keep the strength of your depths continue to be a strength. The Steelers quarterback situation, we've seen Mason Rudolph. Steelers might be, who knows? They could potentially cut him and maybe even sign him back to the practice squad. Everybody's got 2 quarterbacks that they like. And so if they don't think he's good enough to make their active roster, which is what he'd have to do, then they might be able to cut him late in the preseason and final cuts, and they might be able to stash him back on the practice squad. It's either him or Oladokin, and I don't really get the difference between the two. The only thing that it's going to come down to really is if the Steelers think that Rudolph is that much more prepared than Kenny Pickett to be the primary backup this year. And if they think that, he's not going anywhere, obviously.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the Steelers do things a little bit differently. And maybe just keep 2 quarterbacks with the third on the practice squad, save that spot for something else. That's just me.
For sure. I understand that argument. And, keeping 3 quarterbacks is a little archaic. But, again, you have a new GM, so we'll see how they want to do roster construction. But, if they do keep 3, I'm hoping that Rudolph's not on the roster. I think it's a bad sign if he is.
All right, I agree with you there. Let's go ahead and look at the slot receiver battle here. This is one that's going to be interesting this year because we saw what Steelers 11 personnel looked like last year, meaning 1 running back, 1 tight end, and that is 3 receivers on the field at a time. So that receiver playing the slot, the Steelers kind of shifted who that was. After Juju went down with injury, they tried a few things there. James Washington did not really stick in any position at all. He couldn't find the field last year, and they ultimately ended up going with Ray McLeod in that role, who was just completely less than spectacular.
Sure.
Now the turnover at the wide receiver position has been huge this offseason. The Steelers lost Juju, they lost James Washington, they lost Ray McLeod. In their stead, they brought in George Pickens, 2nd-round pick, Calvin Austin, 4th-round pick, who I thought was one of the steals of the draft. We'll see how that turns out. They signed Miles Boykin off of waivers from the Ravens, and they signed Gunnar Olszewski, who is more of a return man than a receiver, but the receiver room looks very different this year. We know that Johnson's going to be that starting X receiver on the outside, and probably Claypool opposite of him as the Z opening up the season. How do you see things playing out in terms of the Steelers' 11 personnel, or when they're running 3 receivers on the field, who is the guy that they're going to go to earn that slot position this year?
Yeah, this is the biggest, or one of the biggest, I think, battles you're going to see in camp, because really what you have to ask right now is who. You bring up Calvin Austin, and I like the pick. I think he can be a very fun, gadgety type player, but I don't think he's going to be ready to go in the slot week 1. So you need to have someone there that can handle that. So outside of that, who on the roster is really going to be able to do that? Deontay is going to stay in the X. He's not going to go shift down to the slot for the majority of the snaps. You could put Claypool there, but had the opportunity to do that last year, and they didn't really take advantage of that. I think he could do fine there. I know you've talked about him, being at that big slot, but I think the team wants to keep him as the Z if they can. So then, again, that just leaves who is it going to be in the slot? And I really think it comes down to Anthony Miller, because, one, he has experience with Mitchell Trubisky. Both of them were with the Bears. He had some success with Trubisky, and he's really the only viable, I think right now, the only viable slot receiver. Again, you can hope that Austin can get up to speed, but to expect him to be doing that week 1, I think is a stretch. I like Miles Boykin, but Pickens and Claypool are both going to kind of be able to provide what he in theory will provide. So I could see him maybe starting the year off on the practice squad if he were to make it there, because you need to have that slot receiver, because this team's going to be running 11 pretty regularly. I mean, that's their preferred base offensive package. You need to find a way to have that capable slot receiver, because, this team's going to need that steady presence there. And they just don't have it right now.
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting, particularly with the receivers at the bottom of the roster. And I don't know how it's going to play. I just did my pre-training camp 53-man roster prediction. Mm-hmm. I had Anthony Miller just missing the cut. And it's hard to know, because I want to see how the Steelers view this. Like, maybe he's a guy that gets a huge boost in opportunity now that both Juju and Ray McCloud are gone, and they're looking at him as, you are a slot type receiver. You have experience in the slot. You're a guy that we can count on from the gate to give us some reps there, kind of like maybe like Eli Rogers did before. Mm-hmm. If that's not the case, and if they have different plans, if they want to shift Claypool over, if they want to use Pickens there, whatever it is, then I think that he's a guy that might get pushed off the roster entirely, because Miles Boykin is a guy that can be the gunner on special teams. Yeah. Olszewski is a guy that can do all the return duties. And so I'm really interested to see how that plays out. Let's just keep this just to the slot position. You're right. Mm-hmm. I'm an advocate for trying to bump Chase Claypool inside there, see how he does, box people out, get him on drags, let him do catch and run stuff. I think he's better at that than he is as a natural receiver down the field. I don't think he's particularly great at adjusting to balls, running routes. And so I think you just want to get the guy in space, kind of like San Francisco does with their athletic receivers. Get him in space, let him run. I don't know if that's the way that the Steelers are thinking, because they tried him out so little there last year. And so if I had to make a prediction on who's going to win that slot job right now, what they're going to do with that, I think it's going to be George Pickens. I think what the Steelers are going to try to do is that they're going to want to get their 3 best receivers on the field. And even though Pickens is young and pretty experienced, only 12 games played in over the last 2 college seasons, he's very talented. And I think that they might try to use him kind of like the Cowboys do for CeeDee Lamb. Even though he's by trade, he can play X, he can play Z, but I think that they might try to play him in that slot role to get him on the field. He's a little bit more fluid than what Chase Claypool is, and he's a better route runner, I think, even from the gate than Claypool. And I just don't think they're going to want to do it with Johnson. I think that they like how he can separate against top cornerbacks and can win from that X position. They can count on him. And so I really don't think that they're going to want to move him inside. He rarely played there. I think he played like 7% of snaps in the slot or something. I have to look that figure up, but it was pretty small. And so they're going to want to keep him on the outside. My prediction is Pickens in the slot. If you had to make the prediction right now without seeing training camp practice start, who would you say is going to man that position primarily for the Steelers in 2022?
I'm going to stick with Miller, at least initially, because while I love George Pickens and I love that pick, it was my favorite pick in the draft, he barely played last year. He doesn't have a whole lot of experience. He's coming off an injury. I think he's going to take a little bit of seasoning before he's really hitting his stride. Now, I think he can make an impact in his rookie year, but I don't think that's going to be week 1. And same thing with Calvin Austin. I don't think either of them are going to be huge contributors. Sure, they both might rotate in, but I don't think either is going to be seeing the majority of the snaps week one. I could be wrong, and maybe Pickens just ready and raring to go, and he fits right in with what the offense wants to do. I just find that hard to believe. So again, I'm going to go with, I think Miller, at least initially, is going to get your first slot looks.
Yeah, and it's definitely possible that a raw young player like George Pickens is just not ready to go from the gate, and I can certainly see that being the case as well. And he's not an ideal fit for there. I think his best role is probably at that same Z position that Chase Claypool plays. But the problem is you can only have one of those guys on the field at a time unless you're running 4 wide receivers. And so I don't know if I necessarily agree with you. We'll see how it plays out. I'm interested to see. I was very high on Anthony Miller coming out of Memphis, but he was an old rookie with a Liz Frank injury. Didn't quite live up to his second round expectations. But again, he does have some good sample size under his belt. Had some good games with the Bears, and so he hasn't really stuck with anybody after that. And went to the Texans for a little bit. I'll be interested to see if he's a guy that can lock down that spot. And if he is a guy that does, the Steelers only kept 5 receivers last year. We're looking at 7 receivers now. Somebody's got to get bumped off the roster. It's either got to be Miles Boykin or Gunnar Olszewski. And so that's just something else to consider as well. Would the Steelers be willing to get rid of a core special teams gunner or the guy that they're probably planning on having as their primary return man? And so that's something else that you got to look at. If Anthony Miller gets one of those spots, one of those guys is going. It's not going to be Calvin Austin. I would very much doubt they're not going to try risking him, trying to stash him back in the practice squad. And so
I hope not.
No, that would be a foolish move, I think, at this point in time, at least, unless he's really struggling. So, super interested to see how that one plays out. We had a little bit more on the schedule for today, but we're going to wrap up here. We're just out of time. Andrew, thank you for joining the show today. You can follow him on Twitter at False Andrew. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also check us out on YouTube. Thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.